Welcome, welcome, my littles. This is Story Time with Oma L. We are reading Ben and Me, Chapter 3 today. The Bargain. When I woke up, the room was sizzling warm. Ben was happily writing, as usual, and I went over to see what was going on. So far, he had written, with a lot of flourishes, an account of the new Pennsylvania fireplaces, recently invented by Dr. Benjamin Franklin, wherein their construction and their... Ben, I said, we'll have to come to an understanding. Do you recollect your exact words when it worked? Why, yes, I do, he admitted, very prompt. He was always fair, Ben was, just over-enthusiastic about himself. As I remember, those words were, Amos, we've done it. Exactly, says I. We've done it. We means two. You and me. Now let's get things straight, Ben. Fame and honors are nothing to me. Cheese is. Also, there's my family to consider, 25 brothers and sisters and a cold vestry in Hungary. I can be of a great help to you. I've proved that. Now what do you propose? He looked pretty thoughtful then, and I could see a quotation coming on. Finally it did. The laborer is worthy of his hire, he said. I don't labor, I said. I think, and maxims don't fill empty stomachs. That's not a bad one in itself, but be specific. Well, we talked it over for some time, and Ben was very reasonable about the whole affair. Generous, too. I think that being comfortably warm for once had helped with that. We finally made the following agreement. Twice a week, rain or shine, he promised to have delivered to the vestry. 1 2-ounce piece of quality cheese, 1 1-inch slice rye bread, fresh, 80 grains of unhulled wheat. For myself, I was to have as home or domicile to me and my heirs, to have and to hold forever, without let or hindrance, with daily subsistence and clothing, in addition thereto, the 1 fur cap. On my part, I was faithfully to give and perform to Benjamin Franklin advice, aid, assistance, and such, at all times and under all conditions, and with him constantly to abide, till death did us part. So help me. Ben wrote it up all neat and with lots of flourishes, Latin phrases and seals. Then we both signed it and shook hands on the bargain. He was fine about the whole thing. Never used a single maxim. I must say he lived up to it, too. Not once in all the rest of his life did that bread, cheese, and wheat fail to reach the vestry twice a week, regular as clockwork. After that, we sat around for a while, basking in the warmth. I couldn't help thinking how my fortunes had changed in a short 24 hours. Here I was, snug and comfortable, Here I was in a snug, comfortable home, my family well provided for, with a good friend and interesting future. I felt so much at peace with the world that when Ben finally asked, Amos, what shall we call this affair? I said, my friend, the credit is all yours. We hereby call it the Franklin stove. And then we went to bed. I was soon comfortably settled in my new home. Ben, who was fairly well skilled with the needle, began to contrive many ingenious little improvements in the fur cap. There was a small compartment where I could keep a supply of food against an emergency, and of course a place for sleeping. There was also a peephole at the front through which I could watch where we were going. This was of great value, for the streets of Philadelphia were, at the time, most ill-paved and congested. Ben never had his wits about him, and I was often able to prevent him from plunging headlong into mud puddles or a market cart. However, the most important improvement that we devised was a small hole in the lining of the cap, just above his left ear. Through this, I was able to give him, unnoticed by others, my observations and advice. Historians are puzzled at the way Ben Franklin seemed to know what was going on in the minds of others. He didn't. The things I discovered and told him made it seem as though he did. The only remarkable thing about the whole business was me. Look at Amos telling Ben to stop. Ben soon became so dependent on my advice that he seldom ventured abroad without me. The fur cap, for which formerly he used only in inclement weather, he now wore constantly, indoors and out, doffing it only in the privacy of our own room. This, of course, attracted no little attention, but Ben also enjoyed that. Look at Amos holding up Ben's glasses. Chapter 4. Swimming. Our life together went along smoothly, and would have continued to do so had Ben not insisting on indulging what I considered a dangerous, unsanitary, and barbarous custom. I am referring, of course, to swimming. As the hot summer weather came on, we often took long walks in the country, which were to me most enjoyable. One unusually warm day, when we had come to a secluded spot on the banks of Schuylkill, I'm not sure that's right. Ben suddenly stripped off all of his clothes, donned a silly-looking striped garment which he called bathing trunks, and plunged into the water. It was only my sudden scream and sharp nip to the ear that prevented him from diving in, cap and all. While he disported in a most ridiculous fashion, snorting and floundering about, I in the cap was left perched in his heaps of clothes, prey to any wandering cat, dog, hawk, or snake that chanced to come along. As we walked home that evening, I spoke my mind fully on this ridiculous habit, and the dangers which it exposed me to. In addition, I said, your hair is soaking wet, and I shall no doubt contract a frightful cold. Ben was stubborn about it, though, and he was rather proud of his skill as a swimmer, and insisted that nothing would happen to me. Nothing did, for some time, until one afternoon, as I watched Ben diving, snorting, and splashing like an overgrown grumpus, the thing I dreaded came to pass. Along the bank came trotting a half-grown mongrel dog, seeking mischief, as is the usual habit of such brutes. I looked wildly about for Ben, but in that moment only the soles of his feet were visible. Fortunately, there were many bushes and small trees thereabout, so I lost no time in scurrying up a small sapling. Here in a broad notch I settled in, comfortable to watch the proceedings. The cur, spying Ben, rushed to the bank, barking furiously. Ben shooed and shouted as he floundered frantically toward the shore. The pile of clothing next attracted the dog's attention. Nosing it over, he selected the cap and trotted off with it, just as Ben, dripping and panting, slithered up the muddy bank. With a wild cry of "Amos! Amos!" Ben charged after him. Apparently, this was just the sort of frolic the dog had been seeking, so for a full quarter hour he had a jolly romp with Ben. Poor Ben coaxed, pleaded, and threatened, but to no avail. Had I not been in such a temper, his ridiculous antics would have been most amusing. At length, tiring of the game, the mongrel picked up the cap and trotted off up the river bank, hotly pursued by Ben, who dashed through the thickets and over rocks with utter disregard for his ill-clad person. Scarce had they disappeared around a curve in the river bank when two country yokels appeared in the scene. Noting the pile of clothing and failing to discover its owner, they became greatly excited. Their excitement increased on discovering Ben's silver watch engraved with his name. "Oh no, the great Dr. Franklin," they shouted. "Drowned! He drowned!" and took to their heels in the direction of Philadelphia, carrying Ben's clothes with them. It was warm and sunny in my tree, and very quiet now. Far up the river I could still hear the occasional sounds of barking. These finally culminated in a terrific outcry of yelps and howls, and then all was silent, and I dozed off. I was wakened by the footfalls of an approaching figure, which I took to be Ben, but few could have recognized in the ludicrous and bedraggled apparition the famous Ben Franklin. His legs were muddied, bruised, and scratched, his bathing trunks torn, his glasses missing, his hair wet, which hung in long discorded wisps, which was surmounted by the fur cap worn as at a drunkenly rakish angle. As he approached, limping, he kept up a continual sound of finger snapping, whistling, and clucking. "Amos! Amos!" he called. "Amos, where are you?" All the while peering nearsightedly into the bushes along the way. Touched as I was by his fondness for me, I could not help chuckle at his appearance. I was about to relieve his anxiety when my attention was caught by the approach of a great crowd of people from the direction of Philadelphia. Among them I could discern the governor, the mayor, and many other prominent citizens, as well as Ben's first volunteer fire brigade. Ben looked frantically about, but there was no escape save the water, and of that he had plenty. So folding his arms, he attempted to appear as dignified as possible, and awaited their arrival. As he did so, he leaned against the tree in which I had taken refuge. Without a moment's loss, I slipped into the cap so gently as to be entirely unnoticed. As the crowd beheld Ben, everyone broke into shouts of relief and joy, accompanied, however, by not a few snickers. Look at Ben and his bathing trunks all torn up and all messy. Men of that time dressed very dignified, and they were clean, and they wore hats, and very different from the men of today. So being seen like that was a big deal. He was surrounded by a milling throng, all bent on shaking his hand and congratulating him. Various articles of clothing were loaned, and he was soon decently garbed. Through it all, however, Ben preserved an appearance of utmost despondency. The governor approached, offering his hat, a very elegant affair, trimmed with lace and gold braid. "Permit me, Dr. Franklin," he said courteously. "Pray do me the favor of wearing this. Your present headgear appears slightly disheveled." "Never!" cried Ben angrily. "This cap shall never again leave my head," and he reached up with both hands to settle it more firmly. I bit his thumb. "Amos!" he exclaimed happily. "I beg your pardon," said the governor. "Yes, Amos," I whispered fiercely, "and if you don't get us home quickly, you'll hear from me. Your hair is soaking, and the scalp is so strong as a dog, I'm half suffocating." Ben brightened up at once, and by the time the procession reached home, was as pleased with himself as though he had done something really smart, instead of just scaring half of the town to death. We'll be back soon for Chapter 4. Thank you guys so much for spending time with me.